The gray one. The person leaving the person that goes up to the
I think.
And there's some stuff that you haven't shared out. I didn't know her name. I didn't do it. It won't be
Okay, that's all. So you
the big We're in Indiana, so we're not talking about. We all do.
If I say something out tonight.
No, it's like you do. You're doing so, I'm telling you, you're doing so good. Trust me, you have way more people in mind than I am. I feel like you have good music. That was
why would I know?
Huh? You're like, I said, no, yeah.
I didn't want to say this. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started here in just 1 minute. So if you can go ahead and take a seat, and we'll get started here in just a second. Thank you. Wow, that like worked.
They were really quiet.
That was very impressive. Like everybody stopped talking right there. Everyone's-
You walk right in. But they locked doors on. No. But they the only entrance. I thought it was two parties.
Yeah,
That's what they opened.
yeah, we have to-
If not, no, bitch, you walk
Do-
right in.
where you came?
The one that says employee. One right here, okay.
Because we have about like 6 employee entrances.
The main, the one right in the middle of the building. Okay. The one that said. public entrance over there. Only.
Right behind the tunnel that got behind it.
No, remember, I was. It was closed for a long time. And I just.
I'll make a little, pit stop on my way out to have.
Luckily, you were safe, but that's.
Well, yeah, no, I.
I'm dangerous.
Rather.
They wanted, just they wanted to go all the way around. I was like, oh, there's a- we can go from here. We don't think it just because we wouldn't have known her.
I don't need to hold all this.
Is that gonna buzz? It's gonna buzz on the top.
I'm trying, I'm sure, I don't know how to work it. I need to turn it off.
Here. You have your notes, you don't have, just put your.
I don't have a bag.
Don't put it there.
It's off. Oh, it's off.
No, why is that? Now you have there.
Don't forget it now.
Are you gonna use it during your presentation? Why is it your off on up there? No, you don't have the bag. Oh, that's a code.
No, you just can't forget it.
I want. Oh, she's like an hour for call. So make sure this phone.
All right, is everybody good? We got our cell phones all ready to go. Are we stop throwing stuff? Are we?
No, you don't.
I mean,
I don't even know how this is about.
okay, thank you, everybody. As everybody's taking their seat, I want to do just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Make sure when you come in, if you sign in, there's some sign-in sheets in the very back, as well as if you need your parking validated, go back to the back of the room and they'll get that validated for you. And then if anybody needs the restrooms, they're just out the doors and to the left. So now, good afternoon and welcome. I am Kelly Welker. I am the Executive Director of Addiction and Prevention Services here at the Division of Mental Health and Addiction. And I'm honored to be here today and welcome everyone to the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, also known as LEAD, Community Care and Coordination Information Session. We are extremely lucky to have national leaders with us here today to provide information on the LEAD program. I encourage and challenge everyone here to start thinking about how this public health approach and diversion program can help improve and be implemented in your own community. I would now like to turn it over to and introduce Naja Morris and the LEAD team. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I'm sure some of you came from near, some of you came from far. I'm Naja Morris Frazier, and I'm the director of the LEAD Support Bureau, and we're so happy to be here today. We want to thank Tamara and her team for having us, welcome us into the space so that we can share with you about the LEAD program. Just to get us going, I'm going to introduce myself and then have the rest of the team introduce themselves, and then we will do our presentation for you. One thing we have decided to do today is to present each slide and have a Q&A opportunity after each slide. So what that looks like, we're going to hold to this. We're going to take about 2 or 3 questions after each slide. The reason we want to do that is because our presentation is a little lengthy. It's going to be about 1.5 hours or so. Sometimes what can happen is if we're on slide 8, and then people forget what was on slide 2 or 3, and there might be some burning questions. With that being said, also, if we are on a slide about case management, and you have a question from maybe 3 slides before about the LEAD structure, please hold that question until the end, because we will also have time at the end for general questions about anything that you didn't get to ask a question about, as well as anything that you feel like wasn't covered that you'd like to ask a question about. So we're trying this. You guys are test subjects. So usually we make everybody hold their questions to the end. So my name is Naja Morris Frazier. I currently live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I began my work with the LEAD program in 2013 as a case manager with the LEAD program in Seattle, which was the pilot project. I worked there for just under 5 years as a case manager, as well as a case manager supervisor. And I started working with the LEAD Support Bureau shortly after that in 2016. So I just celebrated, no, not 2016, 2017. So I just celebrated my 6-year anniversary. Gosh, time flies. So it's nice to see all of you. And I will go ahead and hand it over to Brendan, our Director of Policing.
Thanks, Naja. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brendan Cox. I'm the Director of Policing Strategies with the Lead Support Bureau. I've been with the Support Bureau since January 2017, and I'm from Albany, New York. Before I was with the Support Bureau, I was with the Albany Police Department for 23 years. I was lucky enough to leave there as the Chief of Police. My involvement in LEAD started back in Albany back in about 2015. We implemented LEAD back in April of 2016, so I got involved in LEAD back then. So it's great to be with you all here from the capital of New York to the capital of Indiana. Spent some time in the Midwest in my college days. Went to University of Dayton, and I sent my kid to Ohio State. So apologies for the Big Ten rivalry. So I'll turn things over to Dana.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dana Owens, and I'm a practice advisor with the Lead Support Bureau. And I begin my work with the Lead Support, well, actually with the LEAD initiative in Seattle in 2020 as a case manager, and then went from there to supervising case managers. And now I'm at this wonderful level. I am located a little bit outside of Seattle, Tacoma, Washington. And my grounding here in Indiana is that my ex was from Gary, Indiana. So I spent some time in Gary, Indiana and loved it. Very different from the Pacific Northwest, and then some time in Chicago because it was so close. So Shedd Aquarium, I truly remember. So thank you guys for having me today, and I'll pass it on to Tiara.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiara Bryant. I'm a practice advisor with the Lead Support Bureau. I've been working on LEAD for about 4 years, and I come from overseeing LEAD operations in Seattle and King County. And I started off as a program project manager and then program director when I left. And I am here from Lakewood, Washington, just outside of Seattle, Washington, right next to Tacoma. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so now we'll get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the why LEAD was created, what it was designed to address. So it was created to develop a non-punitive system of response and care. And so this was the challenge, and this was the problem that presented itself in Seattle back in 2008. One reason LEAD was developed was out of recognition that there were a lot of folks that were being criminalized and cycled through the criminal legal system needlessly, and with much harm happening to them and their families and community due to issues related to mental health, substance use, poverty, and being unsheltered. So just essentially behavioral health issues being responded to in a punitive way that we know has been super harmful. It hasn't been helpful and has actually increased the harm to these communities and to these individuals. And it has created the illusion of more need for more police, more prisons, more jails. So the reason the LEAD program was developed was, one of the reasons was in recognition that nobody was getting better in any kind of large way, in any trackable, tangible way from incarcerating people. There have been systems that have worked for a handful of people that have gone through some of the criminal legal systems to get help. But what studies show is that a large disparate portion of those folks never actually got better through punitive measures. Another reason LEAD program started was because the justice system is plagued with disparities that are based on race and class. What we know to be true is that if you look in any place across the country, and in Seattle, the disparities look like 6% of Black and Brown people made up, or African Americans specifically, made up the Seattle area, but they made up over 65% of the people that were incarcerated in that jail for low-level nonviolent drug crimes. So we're talking about stuff like possession of a small amount, possession of an empty crack pipe, possession of drug paraphernalia, maybe low-level thefts and crimes related to their substance use. So one thing that LEAD really wanted to address was looking at changing that. And what we know to be true also through our work around the country and now about 85 sites is that no matter how big or small your population of color is, we have consistently seen there be disparities in the criminal legal system and those people that are arrested and those people that are incarcerated. So whether you have a population of 35% African-American and they're making up 60 to 65% incarcerated, or whether you have 5%, we've seen places with 5% and they're making up 15 to 20% of those incarcerated because of behavioral health conditions and crimes related to mental health, substance use, homelessness, and poverty. Another thing we know to be true, and this is especially true of current situation we're dealing with opioids, is that evidence shows that coercive or punitive approaches are not effective responses, and rigidly defined treatment is also often ineffective, inaccessible, or both. So what we have found is that when people are forced to treatment before they're ready, or not given other pathways to treatment, or not given an opportunity to be able to address other underlying concerns such as trauma and other things that have happened, treatment is usually not as successful. Or if it's successful, there are people that might go through it and then unfortunately come out the other side and they'll use, and because their tolerance is lower, they'll overdose, or they'll use alone and not necessarily reconnected with a safety group. So we really also developed LEAD to look at creating a different approach, which Dana will speak about later, to essentially flip that approach on its ear and look at actually addressing the underlying concerns of people that have been cycling through the criminal legal system. And when we talk about LEAD clients, we're talking about, no, we're not talking about first-time offenders. We're talking about people like 7, 8, 10, 12 years. And that you bring them up and their rap sheet has 25, 30 charges, 40 charges of petty crimes and stops and arrests. And any officer and any prosecutor could tell you, I'm 100% sure that 99% of these charges that are nonviolent, and most of them are related to other issues that have not been addressed properly. So this is, when you're thinking about the LEAD population and who we're speaking of, I just want to make sure you have this person in your mind. And these are the folks that officers been having contact with for years. The criminal legal system knows them by first name. They see them coming. They might know their family. They might be a second generation or a third generation. So this is really to try to capture those folks that are seriously creating an issue with public safety, public harm, public nuisance, and sucking up a lot of criminal legal system time. That includes law enforcement, that includes prosecutors, that includes any kind of court system dollars, and includes a lot of physical health, and we can get into that later. The other thing is that although problematic behavior is harmful, it calls for a robust response, not just a step down. So what we're really looking to do is, one thing LEAD does is take harm seriously. So when we say that these are folks who are low level, we're not saying it to say that the crimes they're doing aren't impactful, don't need a response. It's not us saying that those communities don't deserve to have a response, don't deserve to have something happen. What we're saying is the response that's happening is not working. And we get this consistently across the country, whether in a rural town with 3,000 people or in a big city like LA or Baltimore. What they're doing is not working. This was before the police crisis that we're in now with hiring and retention. So even before COVID, what we were doing was not working. And so this is really an opportunity for there to be a bridge to be built and a collaboration to be built and some power sharing to happen in order to create a system and a response that works for the community, that works for law enforcement, that works for the criminal legal system. And at the end of the day, really works for individuals and is actually responding in a way that's going to keep people on a trajectory that's sustainable and on a trajectory that is going to actually help them long term, and a care response that's going to stick with them and help them on the long term, and not a light touch, time limited type of thing that is punitive and they're white knuckling it just to get away from a certain charge or to get out of a certain situation. So I'm open the floor for questions, or 2 or 3 people, you can come up to the mic. Anybody have questions about that part? Okay, what I'm going to do is go ahead and turn it over to Brendan Cox. He's going to take the next slide. I'll even do this for you. You're welcome.
Thanks, Tasha. So to continue how LEAD started, and this theme could carry over to today, to the very reasons why people want to start LEAD and why people want a different response. So in the early days of LEAD, in the mid-2000s in Seattle, you had an open air drug market in the Belltown neighborhood of Seattle, and you had police arresting a lot of people. Police were responding and doing the things that we were told to do as police, right? We were told we were gonna take folks that were committing law violations, we were gonna arrest them, and we were gonna make them better by arresting them, sending them through the system. But at the end of the day, those folks had unmet behavioral health issues, substance use disorders, mental health issues, folks living in poverty, and the criminal legal system, quite frankly, could not, nor can it still, respond to those issues, especially when there's underlying trauma. So we had police arresting a lot of folks over and over again, sending them through a system and not getting any different results. And you had police, you had community, you had businesses, you had folks that were very frustrated. And at the same time, you had folks from the civil rights world that were very frustrated because, as Naja was talking about racial disparities, the city of Seattle is about 6% African-American, but about 65% of the folks being arrested, specifically in that neighborhood, but citywide, but very much in that neighborhood, were African-American. So very large racial disparities. The racial disparities we see everywhere, certainly in the city of Albany, we had racial disparities as well, especially around drug arrests. So you had a perfect time for everything to crash. You had people that were being arrested multiple times, no improvement in behavior, no improvement in the conditions for those folks, no improvement in public safety. You had lawsuits that started to come at the police department, at the prosecutor's office for patterns and practices of how policing was happening, prosecution was happening. And you had people that were sitting at a mediation table and basically saying, well, what are the answers? Like, what can we do? Because at the end of the day, the folks, especially from the civil rights end and from the law enforcement end, could continue to argue over what should be the answer and how should things happen. Or they could say, like, what could the solutions be? Like, if public safety is supposed to be the answer, like if we're supposed to be all working towards public safety, and if part of public safety is about making people better, about making people whole, because even though we have a punitive system, the punitive system is supposed to be about rehabilitation. It's not supposed to be about arresting people 40 and 50 times. It's not supposed to be about taking people, arresting them, putting them in jail, and saying, well, what's going to happen in 6 months? What's going to happen in a year? What's going to happen in 2 years? It's not supposed to be about sending them into programs that are failing them. It's not supposed to be about doing things that are actually more harmful, not only to them, but also to their families and to their communities. So as folks were sitting at a mediation table, as this collision happened between the civil rights world and the law enforcement world, the captain from the police from the narcotics unit kind of looked at the civil rights folks and said, like, okay, like we can agree that we are ultimately driving racial disparities and we're not helping people. There's no, in Albany, I can tell you this much right now, we didn't hire police officers that weren't taking the job to help people out. That was why I got into policing. I'm sure the police officers in this room didn't take the job to not help people out. So he said, well, what would you have us do differently? Like, what would it be? Like, we don't want to drive racial disparities. We don't want to not help people out. And we want to increase public safety. What would you have us do differently? And the folks from the civil rights world said, like, well, we don't have the answer for what it should be. We just know that this status quo is not appropriate. So both sides said, okay, well, how about we do something a little bit different? Like, how about we actually not continue to go against each other? What if we actually work together to build something different, to have a different answer? Because 99% of the time, there's a small percent when it's not, but most of the time, officers have discretion when it comes to what to do with an individual, when it comes to arrest or not arrest somebody. And a lot of times officers are looking for a different response. But at the end of the day, many times they don't have something different to do with somebody. They either say like, I'm going to arrest this person and continue to do the same thing I've been doing and hope for a different response. Or I don't arrest the person. Maybe I even try to do things on my own to get them into some kind of service. But like, I don't have any way to follow up with that. I don't have any way to follow through. So they said, well, how about we actually do something where we can give an officer a different option, where it's not just binary. It's not just, hey, I either arrest or don't arrest. What if we build a different system where an officer using their discretion, using their ability to say, hey, I don't have to arrest this person. I can actually offer them a different avenue where I can say to that individual, hey, yeah, I have you. I have probable cause to make an arrest. But instead of me arresting you tonight, I can offer you help. And then, of course, if we're going to do that, well, what does that mean? And what is that going to look like? Because we all know that if we just hand somebody a card and walk away, well, we also might not get the best results. And we know that we've talked about punitive systems, we've talked about coercive systems. There are initiatives out there. There are things post-arrest. There's things like drug court and treatment court that can work for some folks. But there's a lot of folks that we know that that's not working for. We know that there's folks that if we try to coerce and they're not ready to do treatment, if they're not ready for that kind of service, we're not going to get through. So the folks said, well, what if we actually build something where an officer actually can get a case manager, get a social worker, and have them actually respond, do a warm handoff, and then have that case manager work with somebody in a much, much different way, in a way that's outside of the system, and in a way that that participant drives the way and direction in which this goes. And that we actually have this harm reduction approach, and we have an approach where we don't require abstinence, and we recognize that we're going to meet the person where they're at. And we realize underlying trauma, underlying mental health issues, and the drivers many times of the problematic behavior that we see out on the street. And that's what started to build LEAD. And that's what started to build this alternative response, an alternative way to address problematic behavior for individuals and problematic behavior that we saw on the street, and ways to do things differently. And that's how LEAD ultimately emerged as the first pre-arrest, pre-booking diversion. We'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about the different pathways to get into LEAD, but when LEAD first started, it started as that probable cause to make an arrest and an officer making the decision not to make that arrest, get that case manager involved, and make that handoff. And that's the initial way it started. I'll pause there to see if there's any questions. Again, we just want to make this interactive as much as possible. So if folks have questions along the way, we just want to give you guys a chance. Yes. So the question was about the sequential interceptual mapping. So there are many places that do the mapping out, that see where the different places go. And as I talk about I'm going to talk about the different ways to get into LEAD in a minute. And we do cover that because we ultimately do have 3 different pathways to come in: an arrest diversion, a straight out referral, and then we have a community pathway. And I'm going to talk about in a minute. But yes, that could get absolutely placed into this. Other folks? So I'm going to defer the harm reduction question to Dana, because Dana is going to cover harm reduction completely. Yeah. So I'm going to have her cover the harm reduction. What I am going to tell you is that we do a large piece of instruction with our officers that are involved in LEAD, not only around what their part is in LEAD with making diversions and referrals, but about what harm reduction is and about why harm reduction works, why it's important, and about why we don't remove people from LEAD for getting a rearrest, because we understand that it takes folks a long time to get to where they're at. No one's going to change overnight. And if we don't stick with them, we're just gonna be like every other initiative there is and punish them and not get them services and wind up ultimately putting them back to square one or worse than square one. So we do a lot of work with officers and lead around the theories of harm reduction, why it works and why it's really important to go ahead and implement it this way and not remove people from lead just because they've reoffended, like the recognition of the stages of change and where people are at and meeting people where they're at. Yes, ma'am. I'll take one more and then we will move to the next one. So we predominantly
had
work
me
with
set
law
up,
enforcement to try to capture people before that
overflow
arrest
room and nobody's
happens,
over there.
recognizing that we're talking about working with folks that are very, very heavily system involved. We don't want that arrest to happen and then the diversion to have to happen within court. But we do work with prosecutors, public defenders, and judges on a second pathway, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, called a social contact referral, which is just an offer for help where the judge could actually make a referral to lead based on just a simple like, hey, this person could clearly use lead services. Let me go ahead and make a referral to lead. So we do. So I am going to turn things to Dana, who is going to talk a little bit more about the genesis of lead.
Thank you. So one of the things about this model and this framework is it is evidence-based. As you can, all the questions that are coming up, it already makes you kind of go, "Oh, how would this kind of work in my community?" I was definitely a part of Seattle when this was happening, when you really stopped to think about what was happening on the war on drugs. And so I saw a lot of my intimate family arrested. And now that I have an opportunity to do this work from the other side is pretty incredible. A lot of questions I'll get a lot of times are from peers who are people with lived experience who decided that they want to be case managers in this work. And they always say that if I would have had the opportunity to have a case diverted and I knew I was going to get a case manager that was harm reduction, that really would have moved me forward in a different direction, even if it meant that I had to be rearrested. But I knew that a case manager was going to be in it with me for the long haul, would have made a huge difference. So one of the things that reason this framework works and has worked is because it's evidence-based. And also that it's gained and it's sustained support from across different political spectrums and sectors. So there's folks that are from the Republican side, there's folks from the Democratic side, and they have a problem that they want to solve. And LEAD doesn't solve all the problems, but it comes in to solve one or maybe 2 or 3 problems in that community and that jurisdiction. So really our question when we really start working with individual areas or individual jurisdiction is, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? That looks different for every jurisdiction, right? It could be, I have an area that right now I have about 15 people that show up and they just need we arrest, but that is not the answer. We need something different. And this something different might be definitely LEAD. And so we go in and we really think about how does LEAD gonna work in this community? Because it looks different from every community. We're in about 85 jurisdictions right now, which means that we're in rural, we're in LA, we're in Seattle, and that looks very different. We're in places that only have 8 shelter beds to places that have 100 shelter beds. But some of our folks have been X'd out of those shelters, so they're experiencing homelessness. So it looks very, very different in all 85 sites. But we're also, there's been about 7 states, including Indiana, that has decided that they were going to fund this statewide. So Indiana currently has 3 sites, Floyd, Fayette, and Knox County. And they've been doing this work for about a year. So we do offer a lot of TA assistance around case management, around working with law enforcement, around working with your project managers. who is absolutely, what you guys will hear further, is the golden thread. We call the case managers the sweet spot. And that's because they're on boots on ground and they're working with those individuals. The other exciting piece to this is that now we're going international. A couple of different countries have asked about LEAD. A couple of different countries have similar situations or similar problems they would like to solve. And so that looks again different, where we might have, when we went to visit UK, for example, our issue with gun violence is not the same issue they have there, but they have knife violence, which is very different, but it's what you have at the time. So the UK is the goal is that UK starts this in 2024. And then we're also headed to South Africa and Durban, and they are looking to launch in 2024 also. So any questions? Thank you.
I'll get a little bit into the harm reduction. So what is harm reduction? Some of you are already practicing harm reduction, but we'll get into a little bit of the details. Harm reduction is a public health philosophy that is focused on reducing the harm of certain behaviors. It's not just about substance use, but a lot of us are familiar with the term as it relates to substance use. So reducing the harm associated with substance use, even if that doesn't mean abstinence for people. It means meeting people where they're at, exactly where they're at. That means physically. So lead case management we'll get into a little bit more, but it means physically meeting people exactly where they are at. They are at being low barrier, being really accessible. Being accessible to people who face some of the highest barriers, people who might be living outdoors, people who may not be able to access services at an office, people who have been stigmatized into believing that they can't or don't feel comfortable accessing services, and meeting people right where they're at within their stages of change. So some people may not be ready to address their substance use. Some people may not be ready for treatment, may not be ready for abstinence, but have goals that they want to achieve, you know, are interested in wellness, or are interested in family connections, education, legal streams of income. LEAD really works on lots of those things. And we find that as people start to address their immediate needs, we start thinking, we're able to think about other things, right? Like addressing substance use, addressing housing, those sorts of things. So LEAD really meets people right where they're at. It's a person-centered approach and non-judgmental. So really about the goals that an individual identifies for themselves. Clients driven
versus what I saw.
Allows clients to be able to identify what their goals are, what they would like to move on, work on. And, you know, helps people feel a little bit more empowered.
Well, and you said that one was
like
what you had exactly
have
before.
some control and some say
prefer
over
to
what
get that,
happens
but
in
I
their
don't know if
life,
these
right?
are extra sharp or dull or
So harm reduction,
just sharp.
it's also about taking all forms of harm seriously, not just about an individual, but LEAD is about harm reduction for communities, systemic harm reduction, collective harm reduction. LEAD acknowledges
I asked that once before.
certain things need to be
Nobody
addressed,
knows.
as Naja mentioned, acknowledges
On the
that
camera
public
downstairs?
safety is important, public order, public
But I
health.
also don't want to mess it up.
So
while
acknowledging
it's
that there is
recording.
a concern that needs to be addressed. There's a community need, individual need, systemic need
I didn't
that
push
needs to
anything,
be
so I'm not
addressed,
sure
and
why
taking it
it's
seriously, just finding a more effective and
focusing.
human-centered way to do that.
Weird.
Also, you know, different forms of harm reduction. We practice different forms of
Literally
harm
didn't
reduction
touch
throughout
that
our
button at all.
lives.
So
It's
I
not
don't know
really
why
a new
it's being weird.
concept. Trying to reduce the harm associated
Okay,
with certain
well, I
behaviors.
guess we'll
That can
assume these
be
are
bike
extra sharp.
helmets, reducing your
don't-
drinking, alcohol consumption,
Yeah, it
reducing
doesn't
your
say.
sugar consumption, right? Dieting.
It does say
It's
sharper and more
really
durable than
not
our
about
standard
all or
blades.
nothing. If we can make the harmful effects of a certain behavior get smaller, why wouldn't we, right? So I know we had a question about harm reduction, so I'll open up to questions about this particular slide and harm reduction. Yes.
So that there's a mental health on both sides.
Absolutely. So I'm assuming you're speaking
Yeah, I
about people who are
also
considered
have not made a
victims in
habit of taking
instances,
my
right?
phone with me when I go
So lead
downstairs.
acknowledges that
And Ted
that
was calling
dynamic
me,
exists, right? And that person on the other
but my
side
phone was up
has
here.
needs as well. Usually there
Oops.
is a form of communication for lead. Hopefully there's a strong community coordination. So there's a portion of lead that's community engagement. Law enforcement usually takes into account victims' input when making a diversion when there is an identified victim. Lead also acknowledges that, you know, you have needs that are, you know, people who are impacted have needs that need addressed as well. So lead has done things like addressing even providing victims compensation, those types of things. Like how do we address the needs and recognize that the person who may have contributed to that, that behavior is actually driven by an unmet behavioral health needs, substance use disorder, or extreme poverty. So trying to help educate community to understand that, like I can be impacted by somebody and also recognize that the reason they did it is because of a mental health need that's unaddressed. And we've done things like working with people to address, you know, a broken window or theft or trespassing, those sorts of things. Also working with case managers work with an individual to help them understand the impact that they have on others, right? And trying to address those underlying needs so it doesn't happen again. So I hope that was helpful.
I wish it would.
I've been in like a diversion program where I'm from in Delaware County. It was called like diversion something. It was like a drug court program, right?
Okay,
And it
now
was
over to this paper.
it was zero tolerance, right? So, and this has been a few years back, but if they would have told me that they had this harm reduction program too going along with it, where they wasn't expecting me to be abstinent, plus telling me they had a zero tolerance, man, I would have blew through the roof. I failed anyway, you know what I mean? Because I hadn't decided in my heart that I wanted to. So, you know, I ended up going to prison and doing some time for my substance use, you know what I mean? But what I'm saying, that the harm reduction program came after I got out of prison, you know what I mean? And I understand with the clean, well, as far as the substance abuse aspect of it, I understand, you know, the clean, wanting to have like clean materials to get high when you felt the need that you wanted to relapse or continue your destruction or whatnot. But I just didn't understand of the people who said they had zero tolerance giving me the okay to come get it from them. You know, it was unbelievable. Now I can understand maybe CVS or Walgreens saying that anybody could come and get clean utensils if they wanted to, because back when I used, you had to be a diabetic or something to get clean needles from CVS or Walgreens, you know, but now like the government, they giving it to you, you know, but they saying they got zero tolerance, you know, so I just really didn't understand that. And I wonder had they thought anything about that, because it takes the conviction away of getting high. That make any sense? For me, it did. I mean, I haven't been using since the harm reduction program started, but if I'm saying, if I put myself back in them shoes, when they said that, that gave me the green light, whether they was telling me I couldn't use or not, it made it so much harder because they telling me I can't use, but they telling me I can go somewhere and get the tools to use. I just, I just didn't understand it.
So thank you for, first of all, for sharing and for your transparency and kind of what you went through. I do want to recognize that things have shifted, and it's not lost on. So when LEAD started, LEAD was not started, and I'll get to your comment directly in just a second. LEAD was not started as a direct response to the opioid epidemic. And I just need to bring that into the space because sometimes it can be conflated. Can LEAD be used, and has it been used as an effective tool to respond to the opioid epidemic? Absolutely. LEAD was developed to respond to the deep disparate numbers of people who were being further harmed by the system, and something that had been going on for a long time, especially during the crack era, when there weren't these same accommodations and these same flexibilities for people. It was much more punitive. So I just want to bring that in the space and recognize that the response now has been different and is different. In direct response to what you're saying, I think that when we talk about harm reduction, we are, at the same time that we recognize someone's not going to stop using right now, we want to keep them safe and alive, but engage with them. So one thing about harm reduction is we're meeting people where they're at, but we don't leave them there. So I'm going to still engage with you. And even if I know you're going to go use after we meet, I'm going to say, okay, make sure you have clean needles and stuff, because to ignore that is ridiculous, because I want you to come back, because every time you come back is an opportunity to have another conversation about doing something differently. The reason we're not going to push treatment down your throat is because if you're not ready, it's going to make you disconnect from services and disconnect from that relationship. So what I'll do is get to know you better, so I can maybe start to understand more what the motivation is, where the pain is, why you're using. And if we can address that stuff, even while you're still using, right? Then maybe you can start to have some change of thought and some different ideas and set a different trajectory for yourself. And when you do, we'll be there to be able to respond to that. So the idea of harm reduction is to keep that relationship for when change happens, that person knows you're there. So it's not and people, this is a misnomer. People think that providing supplies for people to use is going to make people use. There is not a person I know that stopped using because they couldn't get a clean needle. And unfortunately, that's a health issue. There's not a person I know that suddenly starts using drugs because they can get a clean needle. And so I guess that's something to think about, is that giving people safe supplies does not increase or reduce drug use. Giving people safe supplies keeps people healthy and alive. That includes Narcan, that includes fentanyl test strips, that includes clean needles, because all of those things become problematic and become a financial burden on the healthcare system and other systems if people have HIV, Hep C. And so just for more history, harm reduction started as a response to HIV back in the 80s. That's what caused HIV rates to drop significantly, was because people stopped sharing needles and stopped taking it home to their partners. So I don't know if I answered your question. I would love to talk to you more, but it really is a both and. You can respect the humanity and life of someone currently using, while also staying in relationship with them for that change talk and that opportunity for them to make a different decision. If you say that the only way you're going to deal with them is for them to stop right now, you lose that opportunity and you lose that person because you've destroyed that relationship. So LEAD really is looking at countering that and offering a different alternative, and basically pushing against that narrative of it needing to be a black and white. And Dana's going to talk more about it, but I just wanted to respond to your question and your comment in real time. Thank you.
So I'm going to talk about the pathways to get into LEAD, but I'm also want to I also want to kind of dive in a little bit more to that question and to the young lady who asked about the harm reduction in lead as well. Because I think it's important to know like why we also take this approach and like why from a cop's perspective, it makes more sense when we talk through that. So the traditional way to get in is the arrest aversion. So like I have probable cause to make an arrest. And rather than arrest somebody when I realize like the real issue is this unmet behavioral health issue or the person's living in poverty, and I'm never going to address that by arresting the person, I instead hand the person off to a case manager. And like in Albany, when we started LEAD, like every jurisdiction determines what charges they're going to divert. So like one of the things we identified was shoplifting, because we knew like addiction and poverty were like two of the main drivers of why we were our high levels of shoplifting. So our first LEAD participant through an arrest aversion was somebody who had a significant addiction to heroin. And at the time in 2016, fentanyl wasn't on the street, but it was heroin at the time. He was having 3 to 4 bundles a day. He was only using to keep himself from going into withdrawal. He was somebody who wanted to get into treatment. He wanted a methadone program. Well, let's all be real. Can you walk into a methadone clinic and get help? There's a slot open, right? So I live in the capital of New York. There's 2 methadone clinics. They're always filled. And they're not just for the city of Albany, they're for the 1.2 million people that live in the metropolitan area. So God forbid they be actually available for anybody. Like you should be able to, right? I got medication in my bag underneath this podium that I can get at CVS and I can get filled at any time. But if I need life-saving medication, God forbid it's methadone, I can't get that filled by a doctor. I got to go to a clinic. And I'm going to tell you all right now that if I was addicted to an opiate, I wouldn't make it to a methadone clinic every day. I would go by because I wouldn't make it. I know myself. I wouldn't make it to that clinic every day. So this guy wanted to get into a methadone program. So the officer did the right thing, diverted him, got him to a case manager. And that case manager in a harm reduction platform, because we live in reality, had to make sure that he had access to clean syringes, Narcan, that he was using safely, that he had some plan other than to shoplift. And if in the meantime he got arrested, in the meantime, we didn't kick him out of the program, that we kept him engaged, because that's what we needed to do, is keep him engaged and keep him alive until we could get him onto a methadone program and get him the counseling he needed to get him what he needed. He had a bunch of other issues that he needed. He needed housing, he needed real health care, he wanted to get reconnected with his family, and those are all things that were going to happen through LEAD. But there was no way to get him into a methadone program without putting him on a waiting list and without waiting for one of those 2 clinics to have a slot open. And even once a slot opened, there was a bunch of barriers to get through to get him into that clinic, because God forbid we treat people humanely, but we don't. God forbid when somebody walks through the doors of a health clinic, we say whatever we need to do to get you onto your life-saving medication we'll do. But no, if you don't have ID, we kick you out the door until you can get ID, and then you go back on a waiting list. So let's live in reality of where we're at. Even when people want help, I'll get you, I see you. Even when people want help, it's not there. And when cops hear that, they're like, wait a second. I diverted somebody into a program, they wanted help, and they had to wait 6 weeks to get into a methadone program when I know there are 2 clinics sitting in my city that I drive past every day and I see a line wrapped around the door. What is that all about? Why? Why is that system in place? So I say all that to say the first pathway to get into LEAD is that arrest aversion. But unless we get that person engaged with that case manager, we're not going to get them the help we need. And we know we're not going to get them engaged by arresting them. That's not going to happen. The second way to get in was the recognition after the arrest aversion was the first way to get in, us trying to stop racial disparities by arrests. One of the reasons why I like LEAD and why I was part of the group that brought it to Albany was because it's also about trying to be innovative and like being like, hey, we have to adjust. And we have to adjust based on a lot of the people on the front line, officers and case managers who like come back and say, hey, operationally, if we made some changes, we could go ahead and met it. And see Ann and the Floyd team over there, Floyd County, and they've seen this. Like when you hear people on the operational level, like you need to be able to make a change. So officers in Seattle right away were like, hey, we know individuals that we know could use LEAD services, that could use a case manager, but we have to have them actually commit a crime, allegedly commit a crime, to get them in. And two officers one day were on bike patrol and had a woman walk up to them that they knew who asked to get into lead, because people want help, right? Like, even if it's like a little tiny step, people want to engage with somebody. They want to actually be able to sit down with somebody. They want to be able to, if sitting down and have a cup of coffee with a case manager to start figuring out their life, they want that, especially if it means they don't got to go to court. They don't got to have a lawyer. They don't have to see a judge. Like, that means something a lot different. So that woman wanted to get into lead. Well, guess what? They couldn't just put her into lead based on the initial model because it was an arrest diversion program. She had to actually allegedly commit a crime. So the officers were like, I can get, then at that time, and we'll talk about research a little bit later, but at that time, based on research, there were days you can get into lead and days you could not get into lead. And people knew that on the street. So her first question was, is today a day I can get into lead? And it was. So she's like, well, I'll be back in a minute, because she knew what she needed to do. So she went around the corner, got herself a couple of bumpies of crack cocaine, came back and was like, here you go, officers, arrest me and put me into lead. So they didn't arrest her, but they put her into lead. And those officers came back and they told the group that was in charge of the initiative, and they were like, hey, listen, like, this really crazy thing happened. Like, Miss Jones came in and like, we knew her, like, we've arrested her before. We had plenty of contact with her before. Trust me, all the businesses in the neighborhood know her. She had to like go get crack cocaine in order for us to like put her in the lead. And if we wanted to be mean, we could have just arrested her, but we diverted her in because we believe in this. So that created the second pathway to lead, which we call a social contact referral. And that's simply put, officers, like, they know people on their beat, they know people in their zone. And instead of them waiting until they have probable cause to make an arrest, they can just make a proactive referral. They can just be like, hey, this guy, Brendan Cox, like, I'm fed up with dealing with all the time. Like, I got to go to the bodega all the time for calls for service. Like, I got to deal with them. Like, I'm fed up with it. I'm just going to go ahead and make a proactive referral to get him into lead. And we've opened that up to judges. We've opened that up to prosecutors, but we have to say to prosecutors and judges, like, hey, the cops understand that this isn't punitive and this isn't coercive. So you need to understand that when you go ahead and you make a referral, you're not saying to the person, you're doing this, and like, you have to report back to me with everything you're doing. That's not what LEAD's about. LEAD's about non-coercion, non-punitive. So when you make a referral, you're taking, you know, like a leap of faith yourself that this is going to happen. And we'll talk a little bit about the structure. There's a really cool, like, coordinated meeting that happens with LEAD that people get information back, but we don't use it against people. We use it to problem solve. So that social contact referral has become a really important thing. We've seen it really be important in every setting, but especially in more rural and suburban settings, that's become really important, especially because cops are like, I know the people we got to deal with all the time. Let me just be proactive about this. I don't want to wait till I have to arrest somebody. So that was like the first innovation. And then George Floyd was murdered. And we heard back from our communities who said, like, hey, we also know people that could use LEAD. And we also know that, like, we don't always want to call the police. And the police have a lot going on. And with today's world, for the police in the room, I'm sure you all have enough going on, especially with hiring and retention issues that are happening across the country. So we created what we call Let Everyone Advance with Dignity, which Let Everyone Advance with Dignity is our community referral pathway. So that's ground zero of sequential interception. That we got the availability for, if I own a corner store, I've owned that store for my entire life. I know the community. I know somebody that the person that comes in, they create issues sometimes at my store. They might shoplift. I know them. I know their family. I know they got some stuff going on in their life. I don't want to call the police. I don't want them arrested. And the police got enough going on. So instead, I know how to get a hold of the project manager and LEAD. And I can just be like, hey, Brendan comes into my store. I know him and his family. I know they got a lot going on. I know he's got contact with the police before. Can you guys see if you can do some outreach, get him into LEAD, and go ahead and get him some help? Now I save the police a call for service. I get him into LEAD. I get me into LEAD. I get me some help, and I go ahead and get that pathway in. So we've got 3 pathways into LEAD. We've seen a lot of success. The good thing is that no matter how you come into LEAD, no matter how I come into LEAD, whether it's an officer that has probable cause and diverts me, an officer that makes a proactive referral, or a community member that refers me in, I get that case manager. I sign a release of information so all the partners can talk, share information. Officers here know what's going on with me. People can problem solve, and the justice system can get out of the way to the point before about like, when we talk about people that stay sometimes engaged in the system, if I wind up staying engaged in the system, people can talk and problem solve and say like, oh, Brendan got rearrested. Like, how are we going to re-engage? And case managers can be like, okay, let me talk to him about maybe not hanging out on that corner anymore. Not in a coercive way, but like in a motivational interviewing way of like, what do we do? Brendan, what can you do differently so this doesn't happen? Or I have those historical cases that are going back, and prosecutors are going to be like, why am I going to go ahead and prosecute this case when he's about to get housing, or he just got on buprenorphine, or he's about to finally get that slot in a methadone clinic? Like, why are we going to go ahead and continue this when we know we've just increased public safety? So we have the 3 pathways in, really good ways to get into lead, and we continue to adapt a lot based on what we hear from the ground. So I will take some questions. I know you had your hand up. Apologies.
Thinking about is what has been developed in my program. And so I'm probably going to inundate you with a million questions. Well, I've been busy working on my education and doctorate and things of that nature. I haven't had time to get out in the community and find out what everybody else is doing. So I apologize again.
No, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Constantly raising my hands. But as the individual had spoke about the jeopardy of attaining those syringes from Public Health Services, which was started in 1980, and it's been very effective to assuage health crises and get people the care and interaction. At the same time, when an individual who has sought out that help and has that syringe in his possession, there he goes to jail because he's in possession of exactly what we've provided them to assist them. And that is blatantly unfair. But is LEAD working in any way with federal regulations to get this nonsense stopped? It does work, and it does assist with getting people more engaged with the communities who are trying to help them. But this individual had spoke about, it's a catch-22. You can't win for losing. And the incarceration times on that are just ridiculous. I sit in court with many of my clients, and that's why I was asking about the judiciary. I may have a prosecutor who I can finally convince to do a work release program while in the program, but then the judge will come down and lay the boom down. You know, I can get somebody who has 7 years conviction and we got it down to 1.5. Let's do work release, right? Home confinement, let's try that. And then the judge will come out, and all the hard work that we've done for the last 5 or 6 months is lost. Now, granted, I pack that person's stuff, put it in the basement and wait for them to get back out and we start again. But are you working on any legislature to make changes? Because we can do this all day long. I have relationships with the local police officers. They rarely come to my establishment. Maybe once every 3 years, we'll have a situation, and it's always mental health based. Somebody doesn't want to take their medicine. We've all done that, right? We all understand that. But until they change those laws, are we fighting against our own cause?
So we stay focused on the diversion program because there are always laws that people are going to wind up getting caught up in and violating based on unmet behavioral health issues and poverty. We've come to that reality. We all do our own advocacy work for other initiatives, especially around laws that should not exist outside of our work with this. But for LEAD, we stay very focused on the diversion initiative and making sure we're being innovative and making sure we're there, because there are always, unfortunately, I wish I could say there's not, but unfortunately, there are always going to be violations that are going to exist where people should not be arrested because the root cause of the crime has to do with an unmet behavioral health issue or a poverty issue that we know we're going to need to address. we want to be there to make sure that there are legislative advocacy actions that take place. So things like syringes are not illegal. Obviously state to state, they're all different. In New York State, it's not illegal to have a syringe. There's been a lot of work around that. There was a time when I was chief that I had to put a directive out that no one would be arrested for a syringe. But that was because there were some loopholes that existed. But we stay very focused on lead itself and making sure that avenues exist so people do not have to be arrested based on that behavioral health issues and pop.
I just want to add that although we don't shoot all the way up into the policy realm ourselves, because we're busy like in the trenches day to day with folks, I will say that what we know to be true and what we've seen is places that do lead and understand this and start to really understand more about harm reduction, they are able to push back and challenge some of those laws, and officers are able to use whatever range of discretion they have around arresting for that. So as Brendan spoke to earlier, officers use their discretion all the time. Someone's going 85. They're not required to arrest that person or give that person a ticket. Officers use discretion for most things very often. So what we have been able to do through education in the presence of lead, the collaboration that Dana and Tiara will talk about, is be able to shift people's thinking and be able to shift it all the way up to prosecution and judges. There might be a law, but a judge can say, I'm not prosecuting this. You're in the LEAD program. I know why you have the syringe. So I will say LEAD is also about culture shift. And it's like little changes in little pockets, and hopefully it grows. So we're not working from the top down. We're really working from the bottom up. And we are in conversation and relationship with a lot of people that are working at the other levels so that we can kind of meet in the middle so everything gels. But I will say that in places where LEAD exists and has like a strong presence, a lot of those laws and a lot of those things are not happening as often because people are starting to understand, the root issues.
I don't know if you mentioned this, but is this a program just for adults, or do you include minors or like starting at a certain age or something?
So we have stayed in the adult realm of things for really two reasons. One is to do a harm reduction participant-based initiative for juveniles would take two big things. One would be, we try to stay, and Dana's going to talk about case management in a minute. I've already screwed up our order once, so I'll try not to do that again up here. But would be to engage the entire family. And obviously this is very participant driven, and it takes a ton of work to do that from the case manager perspective. And the other is, no secret. Working in a harm reduction world and non-abstinence, to do that with adults is one thing. To do that with juveniles is a whole nother avenue. And there are places we've gone and people are like, we're willing to do that. And we're like, okay, that's great. But there are 99% of the time, it's like, if you bring that here, I'm going to kick you back to New York. And we're like, we'd rather meet you all where you're at right now and work from there. So, all right, I'm going to move to the next. Yeah, go ahead.
Any paper?
So we are.
Pretty
we are
much.
known by some of the police in our area. And so sometimes
Apparently
they will
paper has
bring
gone
them into
up
our
just
services.
like
We provide direct
eggs,
services on the Near East side of Indy.
Went back down.
Before they arrest them.
178 a carton for what
And
he
it's
wants.
kind of what you said. They know them, they've seen them out on the streets. We work with women who experience sex trafficking
I have
and
a
commercial
growing
sexual
list
exploitation. So they will sometimes
Jackie,
bring them to us for
You have
services
things?
prior to arrest.
Okay.
We are currently in conversations with some of the prosecutors and public defenders to discuss some diversion. For
Like
women who
disinfectant.
have that in their
Yeah, I have
history,
my own too.
but are committing some of those like mostly drug offense crimes. And so one of the conversations that we have
You
been
would think
having, though,
That might be
you
fascinating.
stay here without a predefined time limit. And it seems like what they're interested in is defining a time as some of their, if they've committed a crime, then they wouldn't necessarily be in jail for a whole long time. So they don't want the program to be longer than what they would have been in jail for, because we want women to have choice. We want this not to be anything that's coercive in nature. We want them to be able to choose and say, I would rather go to
I
programming
can definitely write it down and then if
go to
they
jail,
question.
right? And they can do either. It's up to them.
Yeah.
But what
I guess it's one
about
of
the
the things we always
predefined
had,
time limit?
that,
How do
like,
you
kids
get
have-
that to,
We had a lot of.
how do you get people to think that that's a good idea?
Someone's-
Because I like that, because everybody's care is
sense that we can
different
buy
and
it
people
too.
require different things. They require
One
different
for each
services. and It's
person,
gonna take longer
so
for some than others. So how do
like
you
5 or
do the
6
without the
ish.
predefined time limit? And get people to
Yeah,
get
we're not gonna
buy-in
put
on
through,
that, I
but, you
guess.
know,
I'll talk about the buy-in, and Dana
Let's
can
start
talk
with
about
each
the
person.
participant-driven, how it's
Okay.
different for everybody and
Yeah,
how
I can
not
try.
having a time limit
Thank
on
you.
things works
Nothing
for
else,
people
they'll just
because
say no.
they can
Yeah.
first of all come in and
I'd
out,
rather them do that.
and people's needs ebb and flow.
Yeah.
Based on every individual. So, the buy-in many times comes talking through, what currently exists, what's happening now, and what a
It's a
lot
lot
of those
cheaper than the
failures
paper
are
Alan
with
wants.
individuals. And talking through like, well, what's happened when we have put.
So it
time
doesn't
limits on
matter
something, and the fact
the
that
width or
we
anything.
put a time limit
Alan,
on somebody and we see that,
Alan.
6 months from now, okay, things might be okay for
Alan,
6
come
months,
back.
and then 7 months later, we have contact again. So why would
he's
we
been rocking out today.
close somebody out
Uh,
6 months in, only to 7 months later have contact again when we have the ability to provide somebody a case manager that can stay with them for as ever long as they need to? Why would we do that? Why would we impart a system of care based on the criminal legal system? That's a punitive system.
It's
A system of
$8 a
care is not
ream.
meant to be punitive. We've set a
$8
punitive
a
system
ream?
up
A
that's
ream.
based on what's supposed to be based on constitutional rights. A system of care should be based
You
on
need to
what that
zoom in to
person's
be able
needs
to see
are.
that.
So let's set that up based on that participant and based on what their
500
needs are.
sheets,
That's more like it.
500 sheets in a ream.
All right.
It's a brighter color, I think, than what you originally requested. 92.
These guys are
We'll
gonna take
answer
that.
Question when Dana comes back.
Okay.
It has worked.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Housing clients in my site, so we can talk about how they do that.
Okay, I will write that down then.
Yes, that's.
That's better than $179.
I can see
Pardon?
we're trying to make the crowd laugh and Brendan is winning.
So strange.
Some paper is
Okay, so
expensive,
I want to talk a
guess.
little bit about leadership and shared
Either
governance.
that or you have expensive taste.
LEAD
Because I bet
is,
like the Office
really-
Depot
I
paper
mean, it is a
cheaper
program.
than
It's thought about
Hammermill.
as a program. It uses human services tools, but
You can see the good stuff.
LEAD really is a framework that creates a
it sure
collaboration
can.
between community and system partners within a community to
It's
address public
28
safety and
pounds
public
instead of
order. So
24
LEAD should be
GSM.
where people from different
'Cause it
entities,
doesn't list
agencies,
anything like that.
organizations come together to agree that they're trying
That's
to
it.
resolve a
Third way,
problem. Everybody might have
Okay,
different ways
I
of
I
thinking
didn't know
about
if that was
that,
critical.
different
'cause this
reasons,
doesn't-
but agree that there is a concern that we're here to address, right? And that might be prosecutors, social workers, behavioral health department, local government, right? Are agreeing that there is an issue we want to address,
Yes,
even if
that's
we
much more
believe
doable than
differently
the
about how to do that, right?
$5,000 for
But have
carton,
agreed to work on
the other one.
LEAD. So usually a lot of these conversations happen within a particular community ahead of time. So people who are
Or
the partners
gonna say, or
within this
not.
framework have agreed to do it, right? So
Or they're just gouging
that
to
means that it's
gouge.
really important for everybody to share power. That's everybody who's in this conversation. LEAD is governed by a policy coordinating group. So
I
a
don't-
policy
I don't
coordinating
know.
group is usually one of the first things to be
I don't
established.
know.
That includes, should include law enforcement, prosecutors, public defense, might be civil rights activists, behavioral health divisions, local policymakers, and local government. And
Electric.
people
but
are
it was big, big
typically in
corporate.
silos
Yeah.
within communities,
we
right?
don't know
And
it's
we're
something
talking
just
about,
like
let's get
those
together, let's
place.
have a
Buildings.
conversation.
Yeah.
Let's have agreements about how we're
$5,000
trying to
get it,
address
you
a
know.
concern that we've all
Why?
agreed is a concern to address
That was
with our
the first thing
community.
that kind of-
So that is
Yeah, was
usually
it
the
lemon or like
governing
what?
body.
Yeah, it was
Good
Is the
something
policy
grief.
coordinating group. People agree that we're gonna share power here. You can be local
No, I
government,
wonder.
you can be
I
from the
mean, I
behavioral
could
health
think of a
division, law
billion other
enforcement, or
ways
civil
to
rights
spend it.
advocate. And we are all
Like,
part of
everyone gets a
a
pay raise.
consensus-based
That's much more
policy coordinating
worthwhile.
group. So there's also an operational work group. We'll get into a little bit more, but that's where the on the ground, hands-on folks, people who
Gross.
would engage with
Non-linen paper.
people who are referred to lead, have those conversations about problem solving. What should we
Okay,
do? What's
so
going
I'm
to
going
make
to go
more
down
sense?
and
I've seen this person
tear
out
down the
here again.
meeting.
Have
No,
you seen this
it's still
person?
going, but it's.
This is
still
why I
saying in
want to
10
refer this
minutes.
person. These are the types of barriers
But
they're
I'm going
facing and what I
to
think is
tear
driving
down
their
the
behavior.
empty
Let's
rooms that
have a
they wanted as
conversation about what
overflow
would
that
make more
nobody's in.
sense and work, rather than what has
I
been
left this stuff in
happening for
there
so
just in
long.
case, like a herd of people
Again, those
came
partners
late.
usually operate in silos and share
Surprisingly,
information that may
the herd of
not have
people did
otherwise
not
been
come late.
shared that helps inform
So,
people's
I'm
decisions
gonna tear down the
within their
overflow room that
respective
nobody's in. And then
agencies,
tear down the actual
and use their respective
meeting that
discretion
ends
to
in
make
10 minutes.
decisions that make more sense for a
And
community.
I'll be back.
The operational work group should have,
Yeah,
also have
it was
case
overkill.
managers, so line staff and supervisors, people who can talk about what somebody's individual barriers
Yeah.
might be,
And
what they're
there's lots
working
of room
on.
in the auditorium.
And then also, you know,
So
just
I'm not
thinking
sure
about
why.
the role of
And actually, I think the
law
overflow
enforcement and
room
prosecutors and
confused
thinking
people because
about
that's where they went
being
first. And then
more,
they had a
the
sign
ability
up
to be
telling
more
people that there's
creative.
room in the auditorium to go there.
One of the
but
cool
people
things
didn't know
about
how to
lead,
get
you know, we
there
talked
from
about time
4 and
limits and
5.
accountability
So then
and people
were
wanting
like
to,
aimlessly wandering.
you know, hold people accountable for certain behavior. One of the things
Yeah.
about lead that
It was a
people like, that
problem.
usually gets people bought in, is everybody retains discretion. So law enforcement diversions are
And
discretion
they didn't even
based.
open up
Prosecutors
5. They just
use
had
their
it in
discretion
4 and said
during
if
these
people
conversations,
show
but
up,
everybody
then
has
we'll
come
take
together
down the
to
wall
agree
and
that we're
open
trying
it
to
up
do
to
something
5.
different and better and more effective, right? So people can use their discretion to do that.
Yeah.
There is also a community leadership team
So
that
yeah,
is
set all
people
that up
within the
for
community who
nothing.
can help drive policy that's related to
That's what
lead.
Ted
So
said.
there
That's
are
exactly
things
what
that
Ted
come
said.
up
It's
within
good
these discussions,
practice.
especially in operational work group, that
Okay.
highlight different barriers that exist within a community. That
Good
could be
practice. All right.
the fact that
Sure.
harm reduction supplies is still not legal. That could be the fact that, you know, people have this, you know, access to housing is really, really complicated and difficult. There's no harm reduction based shelters. There's not enough shelter, right?
know that
There are
Arnold
all
Schwarzenegger.
sorts of things, different things within a community that are issues or
I did
lack
not
of
realize
access
that
that can
Harrison
be
Ford was as
highlighted.
old as he is.
Those can be highlighted at the PCG. Community leadership teams usually include community advocates, people with lived experience, people even who have business interests and might be impacted, who can help share out to the community, who can help advocate for local policy that would help lead run more smoothly and create access for people. It also means that the policy coordinating group puts together the policies, they're shared, the procedures, and shares the oversight. So people who typically operate in silos, coming together, might have, most of the time are going to have discussions about things we disagree on, right? And we're going to try to come to a consensus and talk it through, work it through, talk about what should be more effective or what could be more effective and what should be done. So I will maybe open up to any questions about the shared leadership and governance. Yes. So it is a process. It is typically, so the Lead Support Bureau can support communities in doing this, but it is based within the community, right? So it's somebody who has an interest. That's the usually project management that initiates this, but project management is usually in their own independent agency who has conversations with everybody. Sometimes it is law enforcement that initiates it, local government, but it is outreach. Like you'll have to outreach to have a conversation with law enforcement, have a conversation with local government, have a conversation with behavioral health agencies, an agency who might be able to hold the case management, having conversations with maybe even big business representatives. So that could be like a business improvement area, business association. And you'll find too that when you have those conversations, people are looking for something that works. They're looking for something that's effective. And sometimes, you know, people are like, if they're going to show up, if it works, if it's effective, if this is another tool in addition to law enforcement, or calling instead of law enforcement, and it works, then people are willing to consider it and willing to try it. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So LEAD so it can be funded from in various different ways. There is federal funding right now that different communities apply for to receive for their community. Some fund it locally, and sometimes that is afterwards. Some fund it through grants. And the LEAD Support Bureau does work across jurisdictions across the nation and internationally. So we can help support people with implementation of LEAD, including identifying funding sources. But we don't provide money. I think I'm ahead of Brendan now.
Just to piggyback off of her question, do you guys have like a shared database that the case managers and everyone can kind of go into and kind of see any information, or is that, like you said, just outreach to the various agencies?
So each site, if you're talking about a database for client information, yeah. So there are some that we could recommend, but usually each agency has a database, either one you use for other services or one you've identified that can hold this information. And then I wanted to address, he said, who hires and trains the case management stuff. So when an agency, direct services agency, is identified within a community, they're usually part of that grant recipient. And then LEAD Support Bureau can support different jurisdictions with the training of all partners within the LEAD structure in your community.
Do you guys have data showing the cost effectiveness, like your judge's time, your prosecutor's time? I just think that that would be super helpful for counties that are first starting out.
Yes, absolutely. We have a lot of data from the original longitudinal study in Seattle, and then many other jurisdictions have conducted studies that we can share, and we'll address that in a little bit too, a little bit more. I'll pass it along. Thank you.
Yeah, one more question.
My question is, how,
Whole question. I just want to make sure we get through our whole process.
It's
and then
not
we can have
going.
state questions for last.
Yes. So I'm going to go pretty quick through this piece, but it really talks a little bit about when we think about the governing body, and we think about, I think this one's mine. Yep, that's mine. Sorry about that. So I hear everyone in the room talking about the case management piece and what we know for sure our folks need and what would make them successful and not just in this program, but in our community and in their own lives, right? The approach to that is what we find very different. Our approach is, first of all, every participant that joins and decides they want to be in LEAD, it is non-coercive. It's all a volunteer. So they have the right to say yes or no, which is really powerful for this population of folks because power has been taken away. So we really start there, right? We really start thinking about how do we engage and give them back their power. One of the other things that we do is when we first meet this individual, we're really thinking about what are their immediate needs. So it starts with that relationship, right? It starts with that conversation about, hey, how are you today? And so diversions come in many forms and many ways to case managers. It might be a warm handoff. It might be an officer giving me a name and I'm going out to find this individual. And that relationship could look anything from, hey, do you want a cup of coffee, to me outreaching the individual for 2 or 3 weeks and finding them maybe underneath the bridge. And then I'm going to sit there and I'm going to talk and I'm going to have that conversation about, hey, can I get you a cup of coffee? Hey, I don't want to be bothered today, and that's okay. I'll be back in a couple of days. Hey, would you like a cup of coffee? And that's what is a little bit different, is that, and what I love about this case management style is it's not a push or a pull. It is definitely, when you think about the participant, is their driven goals. It's something that they identify and they sit with. So that can look anything from, hey, today I want to go and get my ID. And that's what we're doing today. And a lot of us who have done case management before realize that IDs can take a long time, right? It might not be where we can walk right in there. We might need other documents, but I'm right there walking right next to them. So the other thing about our case management style is that when we say it's field-based, means that we're out there with t-shirts and jeans and tennis shoes. And we're going out to find them. Realize this population usually doesn't do really good with 9 to 5, meet me in my office at 3 o'clock and I'll see you there. And since we understand and we know that, that means we're boots on the ground. That means I'm going out to find these individuals and I'm starting that relationship, and it might take me 3 or 4 months before we get back into, Dana, I need my Medicaid. And that's where we begin. And that's where I will meet that individual. And that means that figuring out how to get them to an appointment. That means how to really sit back and figure out what were the triggers, what are some of the spots that has made it so they haven't been at any appointments. It is not time limited, or there's no time limit on this. So I heard someone really ask about, how do you do that when you could have 9,000? What makes the case management in this really, when we really stop to really think about it, it makes it great, is that we're able to, first of all, case managers only have 20 to 25 people. They're able to dig deep and long, and they're able to meet individuals exactly where they're at. And we start small. So if you haven't started this program or haven't thought of you're at the very beginning, you're not going to start with 5 or 6 people. You're going to start with the first 2, because the goal is that we are looking at these individuals and we're recognizing that this is going to take time. So there's that piece too. The key to this is the relationship. We believe the relationship is the intervention and sometimes the only resource. I know a lot of us are sitting around where, if you're doing any case management or you're looking for any resources, housing is a big one all across the nation. And a lot of times we get our folks that say, hey, I want housing. And we're like, that's 2 or 3 years out. But we work with them right then and there, because there's a lot of things to getting folks sometimes who haven't been housed for the last 10 or 15 years, right? A lot of documents, a lot of time, a lot of assessment, a lot of working through some of their angst and their triggers and the trauma, right? Some of our folks decide they don't even want to be housed because they feel safer outside. But we're able to really sit down and dig deep. And so really sitting down and really saying, okay, this is where we're at. So the other piece of this too is the question is how do we do this? We do it through trauma-informed care. When you think about generations of trauma, we think about when we walk into a community and really sit back and think about, why has this individual, how has this individual got here? We don't just blame it on that individual. We think about it as a community. What has the community done or not done? What has the system done or not done? Or what has politics done or not done? So when I'm the case manager working with this individual, I'm thinking about them, but I know a lot of times they're not just going to tell me their story because they don't trust me. They shouldn't trust me, right? I'm a part of the system in different ways. So I have to build and figure out how am I going to get that trust. So that a lot of times that comes from having the conversation through motivational interview and recognizing that this is, like we all know, definitely stages of change. Always talking, people laugh at me about stages of change. I am definitely that Monday morning diet. It starts on Monday. I'm gonna start my diet. Every Monday, I got my gym clothes in my bag. I'm gonna start this diet. Tuesday comes, oh God, it's kind of early. Do you mean I gotta get up? I gotta eat right? Wednesday come and Thursday it's over. I'll start again on Monday. So with that and stopping to really think about that, think of our folks. Sometimes we judge them and sometimes there's these stigmas. But if we just took a moment to just say, not who you are, you did this, but what brought you here? What is your triggers? What is your struggles? So I do a lot of training with case managers because a lot of them are asking, how do you continue to do this work? And how do I do this work? And how do I show up for folks? One of the things that when I was working with participants, they used to tell me, I could see, and I'm just going to use this word, someone that would BS coming, I could see them coming, but I knew when I had an authentic case manager. And I said, how did you know? Time. When I disappointed them, when I didn't come to an appointment, that case manager was still there. When I got rearrested and that case manager was looking for me, they came to the jail. They still had conversation without judgment because that's their role. And that's what we encourage our case managers to do. The other thing is the only requirement they have after they decide they want to accept is usually doing an intake, psychosocial assessment, kind of figuring out where they're at. That doesn't happen. Sometimes sitting down with them at the first sit down. Sometimes my folks might have looked at me and said, Dan, I need to get clean, or Dan, I'm about to get sick. Can I finish this tomorrow? That takes time too. I'm able to sit with them, able to kind of really figure out what that looks like for them. The other piece is, of course, this signed release of information. The reason why we do that is because our OWG, Operational Work Group, that meets every 2 weeks. And the reason, and the people that are sitting at that table, and what I enjoy doing most, but I only got a short amount of time to do this, were the prosecuting attorney, was law enforcement, maybe even a law enforcement person that decided that they wanted this to be the person that they referred in, and they wanted to hear about what was happening to Johnny. So they could come every 2 weeks and hear from the case manager what was happening to Johnny. So when they went back out there and they saw Johnny, they knew, oh yeah, but Johnny has his birth certificate he hasn't had in the last 10 years. Oh, Johnny is also signed up for mental health. They know that now because they're coming to that OWG. That's why law officers love LEAD. The other piece too is that as a case manager, my role is to humanize the participants I'm working with, to tell their story. A lot of times their story is not being told to the people that can make drastic decisions in their life that can set them back when I've gotten them to a certain place or they've gotten themselves to a certain place. So we always making sure that all the folks in that OWG know. So it's prosecuting attorneys, law enforcement, sometimes service providers, and always case managers, and the person that facilitates that is a project manager. So with all of that, that's exactly how we let the community know. Because when we say this is a collective impact, it's a collective impact, and it's a lot of work. It's not something it's not a framework where you could just throw in there and say it's done. It's a framework that you put up and you're gonna be adjusting because our population changes, or the community might want something different, or the charges might need to be changed. The other thing the case manager does, and this is why the case manager, I think, holds a small load, is that they're responsible for continuing those relationships with law enforcement. So they build a relationship with law enforcement outside of the OWG because they want to make sure that their folks are okay. And they want to know, so a lot of times law enforcement tell case manager, I could say I haven't seen John, and law enforcement says, oh yeah, because John moved over he's not there anymore. He's underneath that bridge now. They have an investment in this. The other thing case managers do too is they build the relationship with prosecuting attorneys. So when you stop and you think about those prosecuting attorneys, the goal is to build that relationship. So then when I get in front of you and I say, oh God, my individual has this charge, or my individual wants to know, does he have any new charges in other areas? We could start from there. We could start really truly working on that one participant, not just looking at them as this one person homeless or have a substance disorder or dealing with mental health. We could look at the totality of that individual, because by the people that I'm dealing with and by the people that are sitting in all of those rooms, right? And then the community is huge. We build a relationship with the community, right? Because our folks are out there. Those are the ones, our folks are usually sleeping in front of the stores, and the stores are like, why are they still here? Every morning I come in and they're here. I'm building a relationship with that store so I can have a conversation with the participant that I'm working with and say, hey, they open up at 8. Is there something that I can do to make it that you're gone by 8? Would that work? So it's really stopping and really looking at this individual instead of a lot of times as a nuisance, but that how do we look at them as being a part of our community, because they're not going anywhere. They're here. So with that, anybody have any questions? A dashboard for. Oh. I thought they had a difference. It would be jurisdiction by jurisdiction, definitely. We were thinking about a dashboard, and we realized how complicated that would be for us to do nationally. But definitely the goal, I have a direct service call that's every Thursday. So I train case managers, and we have wonderful conversation about what's happening across the country. And those case managers show up and they have the conversation about what they're doing, what's happening, what are their struggles. Burnout is huge. And so there's that platform. We also have a platform, law enforcement. Law enforcement are a part of LEAD are able to jump on a call monthly and for us to hear and for them to talk about what does it look like for law enforcement. And we always have some subjects and things that we're working on. And also project manager. They also have a direct a call that happens once a month. And then we also recognize that there's supervisors, right, that are part of working with case managers, right? So we also have a supervisor call, but it just a dashboard, not yet, but we will, our website for the LEAD Support Bureau will be fast and opening probably next month.
I just wanted to come back to the question you had in the back about, you can stay up here. She ran away. So you had a question about how do you manage so many people when you have people that stay open forever? And so one thing to understand is, on top of what Dana mentioned about how we do the work, another piece of that is what we look at is people might be in different phases of their life. So I might have someone that requires a lot for 6 or 9 months, and then they either phase out, they might disengage for a while, they might have success and not need me as much. So really what we do is we coach sites to create a system that kind of tiers participants. So out of a caseload, let's say at 25, you might only have 10 that you're dealing with weekly. Right? And then you might have 3 or 4 that you're dealing with biweekly. You might have a few that were on your caseload, maybe 5 that are like stable and they don't need anything because whatever stability looks like for them. And then you might have a couple of outreach clients. So participants that you're engaging with, but they're not really to do anything. And so what happens is after someone's just kind of disappeared for a while, you can kind of put them on hold. That opens up slots. People that are like doing well, stabilizing, you put them on hold, that opens up slots. So what you're doing is you're really just triaging the participants. And this also requires a really highly skilled clinical case manager supervisor or someone that could work through these cases to really help the case manager to understand where people are in their stages of change. How often are you really seeing this person? And then that helps to create more space for more referrals. Ultimately, lead programs across the country have grown. So you might start with 3 or 4 case managers, and then after 2 or 3 years, hopefully, because evidence proves that it's effective, you get more money to add a case manager. So Seattle started with 4 case managers back in 2011. By the time I started in 2013, I was the 6th case manager. And then probably by mid 2014, we were up to 8 case managers and an outreach person. So what happens is you continue to prove the concept that this works. And then that's when you can get money from local, city, state governments to be able to even just fund another case manager. So yeah, at some point you're going to need to grow. But the concept of staying open forever is one that works, because if someone, like, say they have housing that's really stable for a while, and then like somebody passes away or they get a medical condition and they relapse, you don't want them to have to go back through everything. You want them to be able to come back and say, I'm struggling, I ran into an issue. And of course, they're going to tell you the truth because you've built this relationship. I need help with rent. I need somebody to come advocate with my housing person, and then they're back in the program. So we recognize that even for ourselves, people that are supposedly normal, there's times in our lives when stuff can go well and times when it seems like everything happens at once. And I know sometimes I'm looking around for my case manager so we want to recognize that if someone's been out there for 10, 12, 15 years, they could be doing really well for a while, and we hope it sustains. But sometimes life be lifing, right? Sometimes stuff happens and you're like, hold up. And then you help them with a couple of things and then they're off and away again. So that's why we say they're always in lead. And that's kind of just clarifying the concept of how can you have cases forever? I hope that helps that part of your question. Any other questions about case management? Sure.
In the beginning, you guys mentioned peer support. I'm just wondering if your case managers and peer support are one and the same, or is your peer support a separate part of your team? And if they are separate, how, when, and where do you use them?
So that looks very different across the country. Our best practice is that peer support, if you have them and they're working, they should be working at the same level as case managers, should be paid at the same level as case managers, because we really recognize that the work that they are going to be doing is exactly the same as case managers, unless something is different where you decided that the way we broke it down is that we have 2 case managers and that our peer support really is the person that goes out and kind of fills in the gaps. If that's not happening, they're doing the direct to service work, and they're doing, and the expectations are that they are doing what case managers are doing. Absolutely. They should be paid and they should be considered case managers. Lived experience is wonderful experience. I wish I could answer that, but I think that's state by state, and you might want to ask Tamara a little bit more about that. But I know there are some places that are really pushing that. They get them certified, peer support, those kind of things. But the catch is, and I'm definitely going to get on my soapbox a little. Usually the people that are peer support have life experiences, have records. And a lot of times we look down, or there's stigma in the way that they even feel empowered. And we are the ones in the room that says if they are doing exactly what case managers are doing, they should be recognized as case managers. Because what we do believe is it shouldn't be all peer support, and it shouldn't be all folks that have their masters or their bachelors, right? It should be a combination of folks, because each of those folks brings something very different to the ballpark, very much so. I think there was one more question. Okay, we're done with questions right now. We'll go ahead and pass it over.
Listen, let me tell you, in case you didn't figure it out, I'm the traffic director. I appreciate all the questions. Some of you guys can stay over after later. We'll be here. Just want to make sure we get through all our slides. So we're going to kick through these pretty fast just because of time. I love that we're late, because that means that there's been lots of conversation. And also, I don't like being late. So LEAD is it's not a program. So sometimes people think of LEAD like it's not a set it and forget it. It doesn't operate in isolation. We've talked a lot about this. I won't go over it too much. LEAD, as you maybe picked up, it's an approach. It's a collaborative effort that takes everyone. So LEAD isn't going to be this program that just hides away in the corner of a single agency. So that's one thing sometimes people mistake, is LEAD is just this program that can just be easily replicated. It can't. LEAD, as we say, can be very hard to do and easy to mess up, which is why we exist. But when LEAD runs like it's supposed to, it's highly effective. So LEAD shifts the collective system response. We've talked about that. It's bringing people who don't normally sit at a table to the same table. It's breaking silos of people that usually very happily sit in their silos. And in those silos, people inadvertently and sometimes on purpose cause harm. It builds agreement about resource shifts, and new non-punitive investments that are needed to advance safety and order. So again, we're talking about a comprehensive public safety response that includes many partners, community partners, business associations, the mayor's office, the county council. Everybody's saying, this is what's happening. What are we going to do? This is a roadblock to helping people and helping communities. What are we going to do? It also provides a framework for information sharing and care coordination. So one thing is, the part of the framework is the operational work group, right? Another part of the framework is the policy coordinating group, of which the operational work group feeds information to that project manager, which is that golden thread to take to the PCG, that board of directors, to say, this isn't working, this part of the system is broken, someone up there needs to fix it. You want to have people with power and influence that can make stuff happen on your PCG, so they can change policies and procedures that are harming this process and keeping people stuck in places. And lastly, it reserves scarce legal system resources for where they're truly needed. Again, when LEAD is working well, law enforcement gets to spend more time on the higher level, high acuity calls, and they don't have to spend what we have gotten said to us behind and in front of closed doors. Most places say they spend about 50 to 60% of their time on stuff that is not high acuity, that is behavioral health, mental health, being unsheltered, people decompensating. Whereas, especially in this day and age when police resources are becoming more and more scarce, it's a drain on not only drain on the criminal legal system at the judiciary level, but also a drain on law enforcement, because they don't have the time and the resources and capacity needed to respond to the stabbing, to the gun, to the armed robbery, because they're over here trying to figure out what to do with Marky Mark, when they could have just been like, hey, I'm going to a shooting. Can somebody from LEAD go check on him? Seems like he's out front of the CVS causing a ruckus. So now the officer doesn't have to go respond to CVS. So it really is trying to consider how to reduce the reliance on, and to also reduce the exorbitant burden on. And to be honest, asking people to do a job that they were never trained or never were supposed to do. Like, these responses and these types of things were never meant for law enforcement to respond to. And so it really is time that community-centered services and a care response model are able to pick that up and run with it. And I just want to say, I love what Dana said, and we always say, these people aren't just those people over there. If they're impacting your community, they're in front of your store, they're in front of your grocery store, guess what? They are your community members. And we have to start thinking about them as such, because trying to think of them as others is not helping your situation and is not making them disappear. So I'm just going to leave that there. And we're going to go ahead and I don't know who I'm kicking. This is Tiara. We'll run through these last slides and we'll save at least 3 minutes. I don't know if people can stay after. My math is not mathing. Come on up.
All right. Some people tell us. Yeah. We have treatment court, drug court, community court. We have co-responder initiatives. We have crisis intervention teams, alternative police response, overdose response, or post-arrest diversion. That could be court-based diversion. That is good and can be great, but it's not LEAD. LEAD isn't these other programs, but can work in coordination very well with these other programs. So LEAD is really about a golden thread that creates a collaboration across the continuum, across the spectrum, across all the entities, organizations, and responders who come in contact with people who are eligible. So we've worked in different jurisdictions across the country who have maybe one or two or all of these other programs, which is great. And LEAD can still operate within a community and offer some additional resources, additional collaboration, and really bolsters a community's ability to respond. LEAD also works within a community's framework of resources, right? So LEAD case managers don't necessarily have housing, right? Or a treatment facility or things like that. So LEAD works within a community to guide people to accessing things like public benefits, housing, treatment, whatever else they identify, civil legal aid even. And I'll just add too that can create an opportunity for local advocacy for these types of things, right? So yes, LEAD is different than a lot of these initiatives. LEAD can operate in coordination with these initiatives that exist in your community and is usually quite different. No questions
No
here?
question,
Okay.
sorry. I'm breaking my own rule. Talk to me after.
There's going to be a quiz at the end for all of you to figure out if you can guess which order we went this entire time up and down. So there's a lot of evaluations now on LEAD. They started out in Seattle. They've been in the most recent is North Carolina, which is a multi-site evaluation. There is one in California for San Francisco and LA. There's one in Colorado for 4 sites there. There's one in New Mexico for 8 sites. So there's a whole bunch of evaluations. I'm going to make this real quick by saying we have data and evaluation tools that we can provide folks for both what data to collect, how to collect it, what that data means, whether it's criminal legal system data, participant-driven data, healthcare data, like what that would all mean. And then like some of the best ways to evaluate, like whether it's, for a process evaluation or more importantly, an outcome evaluation and what that means and how that can help drive like what that means to make decisions later on about like, okay, we started to do this. What has been the impact? And what does that mean for us? Do we like continue to do this at the level or should we go ahead and drive this? So like one of the main reasons why people, as they started to see what was happening in Seattle, they wanted to do this was because they saw 58% reduction in recidivism and then saw cost savings, saw like people get legitimate income. North Carolina, as I said, this is a multi-site evaluation. The North Carolina evaluation is the most recent. A lot of people have looked at that because it's been across rural and suburban sites. So people have seen not only that, again, reduction in recidivism, but also people increasing access to behavioral health services, cost related issues dropped by 50%. Los Angeles, they were able to see participants experience 5 times less felony arrests happen, participants spending less time on probation. So again, we're talking about people that are system involved. So engaging people on probation, on parole, folks that are system involved. For folks that really want to, take a good trip, go to Honolulu, see folks sleeping less outdoors, a decrease, we talk about this harm reduction approach, like decreasing the use of drugs, like recognizing like people, okay, they didn't become abstinent, like they weren't ready to do that, but that doesn't mean we weren't able to decrease the use of drugs, get people to a better place. And then, we often leave out the part of evaluations where we look at hard data, but we don't talk to participants. We don't talk to the stakeholders. So it's important in evaluations to also talk to people. So like participants, like in the Honolulu evaluation, participants like felt healthier. They felt better. They were living better lives. They were like, okay, we're in a better place. Just like other folks in other places, like we've seen tragedy, like we know participants that wind up dying. And like we talk to case managers, we talk to police who have engaged with individuals and they're like, I've had this participant, they wind up dying and like they've seen tragic things, but we've known that people's quality of life and their life's been better because they've been engaged with people that have done a lot of really hard work with them. So, we know participants have better outcomes. They feel better about themselves. They feel like they're in better spots. And when we talk to case managers, when we talk to police, when we talk to prosecutors, they also see changes. So it's important to not just do evaluations on data and cost savings and recidivism, but about how participants are doing. The last piece that we know we need to do when it comes to evaluation, we need to also look at the health costs, because we can talk about criminal legal system costs. For anybody that's in the criminal legal system here, I think we'll all acknowledge that unless we close jails and prisons, which we don't close a lot of jails and prisons, just plain and simply, that's not going to happen a lot. That savings isn't really going to happen an awful lot. But we know that the folks that we have in lead, there's a high crossover to folks that are going in and out of emergency rooms every single day. We know we can have a really big impact with that, and we've seen that over and over again. And we know with healthcare systems, we actually can show that savings, and we could actually invest a lot of that money back in to having frontline case managers out on the ground doing work with folks. So we have a lot of evaluations that we can ultimately give you guys access to, and we will give you guys access to.
Okay. 3 golden rules, and then we'll take questions until they kick us out. So lead is more, not less. It's more and not less of a response to real problems associated with drug use, drug economy, but also for folks dealing with mental health, substance use, and poverty, and being unsheltered, and other issues that come up around public safety and disorder due to behavior related to those concerns. The other thing is that no one can be worse off for being in lead. So lead isn't a gotcha program. So anything that's shared between law enforcement, prosecution, at the operational work group, it can't be used to now go after that person, say, oh, I know this person is still using, I'm going to go get him. So there's an agreement, and it has to be in good faith, that the point of lead is to share information in order to help improve that person's situation, make plans around that person, and to, at the end of the day, improve the disordered situations in public safety in that area. And no one loses authority. So a law enforcement officer can do lead one day, and the next day he sees that person and he decides to arrest him. So lead is not a get out of jail free card. So no one loses the authority to do their job. So at the same time, no one should be worse off, and that's respected. We each at that table respect each other's autonomy to do the job. Now, that being said, all partners are asked to do what is possibly within their scope of their authority to actually improve the circumstances, while being really honest about the work they've done and their behaviors and their practices up to this point, and understanding that that probably hasn't worked. So we just keep challenging each other to say, now, you put him in jail for these these misdemeanor warrants. I'm telling you that any day now he's going to be called into an immediate need for a housing appointment. Is that more important for you to put him in jail on these 3 charges when he's been in jail 12 times this year? Or might it be more important for me and you maybe to go have a talk with him to say, I know you're waiting on housing, but I really need you to not be here. I really need you to maybe go somewhere else, because you being here is creating an issue. So we're always looking for alternatives and collaborating around these things. So these are the lead golden rules, the biggest 3. And we are at time, but we can take some questions. I don't think we're getting kicked out anytime immediately. We'll take a handful of questions and then we'll be around if people want to come talk to us personally. Yes. Oh, boy. 2 phones left in the ladies' stall. Mickey Mouse and no case. You missing your phone? Did you go potty lately? Okay, yes, back there. So we don't, as a national tech TA board, each site, their group, their policy coordinating group decides what exclusionary and what eligibility looks like for them. The reason for that is that, again, we think that all the primary partners and the shared governing folks should have buy-in about what that looks like and what works for each site. So it could be all the way from no exclusionary to the only thing that people get to only inclusionary charges are, one site had like 2 grams of opioids and that was it. They changed it pretty soon after because they realized they weren't getting a lot of clients. So it's up to that site and we work with sites to help them decide what's best for them. So each environment is really different. We're in some very safe rural areas, and then we're in some areas that are more urban and less safe. So we work with the case management team, the supervision, the agency, and most of those, if it's in the right place, they already have a lot of those policies in place. So it just is going to depend on the person's comfort, what the agency says. So we, as the support bureau, we don't decide any of these things for the site. So that's one thing that's great, is that we have some founding principles and some fidelity that we say must happen to be lead, but all these little nuances are really site by site. So we, again, help sites to determine what works for them. I'll take one more general question, and then anyone else that has a question can come up right there in the back. Yes, you. Okay, great question. Traditionally and preferentially, the case manager should work under a community-based organization or a nonprofit. Preferably, they should not work within or under like law enforcement or prosecutor's office. The reason for that is because there needs to be a certain amount of autonomy and flexibility with how they move, when they move, as well as just in the public. Usually there's a different trust that's built and different visibility and relationships that are built with a community-based organization that maybe already does low barrier outreach, already has homelessness services, might already have like a team that goes out, or might already have like another team that does like light touch kind of intervention. So preferably it's like, and then if they already do harm reduction, I know someone mentioned over here, that's even a bonus. So out of all the sites, we only have 3 or 4 that actually have case management within an agency that already historically has been doing harm reduction. That is like a high at 10 out of 10 on the fidelity marker for us, because what that means is those folks are going to get the proper support and they're going to be acculturated to harm reduction and be in a space that allows and encourages that type of approach. So anyone else, if you guys want to come up, you guys can also reach us through Tamara and the team. If you have additional questions, if you want our cards, you can come up and grab a card. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for your patience, and look forward to hearing from you if you're interested to hear more about the LEAD program.